Welcome to IVF This, episode 95, Life After IVF with Lana Manikowski. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, 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 my beautifuls. Oh, man, I can't go high today. Must be from the cold. Anyway, I'm so glad you guys are here to listen to this interview that I did with my friend and fellow coach, Lana Manikowski. This individual is so lovely, so beautiful, so friendly, so loving. And I'm so excited that you get to hear her story. So Lana is a coach specifically for women after treatment. So when treatment has failed and you are rebuilding your life after IVF and fertility treatments, Lana is your person. She has gone through several rounds of IVF, IUI, and then was faced with rebuilding her life and what that meant after treatment was not successful for her. Now, I think that everyone listening could benefit from hearing this. If this feels too personal or too scary, that's okay. You don't have to. I would invite you, though, to open yourself up to the possibility of just listening. And by listening, you are not tempting fate. You are not putting bad juju out into the universe that considering a life after treatment is not bad, right? What I talk a lot about is planning. And one of the things that makes life after treatment so scary and so overwhelming, just the thought of it, is that we just don't know what we're going to do with ourselves. And Lana talks a lot about that. So I want to invite you to let the scary thing that you're afraid of be something that you hear about today and not make it mean something about your future. But again, trigger warning, if it's too much for you, it's okay. Turn it off. You're not required to listen. Nobody's handing out grades here. But I do want to invite you that it's a beautiful story and a beautiful way to kind of look at the future, even though that might be a future you're very scared about. And that's okay. So enjoy today, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye. Hello, everyone. Lana, I am so excited that you are on the show today. Thank you for being here. We have so much to cover, but I want to start out by letting you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey through infertility and how you found your way to coaching.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for graciously inviting me to join your podcast, which I know is such a huge resource to so many of us with infertility and those of us looking to navigate IVF, because it's like a ton of bricks that comes at you when all of a sudden your life turns upside down. So let me tell you how my life started turning upside down. I was 35 when I got married, always very regular with my periods, no issues, fibroids, nothing like that. And at 37, a friend who was very interested in my fertility journey or whether I was going to have kids because she went through IVF, asked me if we were planning on having a family. And to be honest with you, Emily, I never thought it was going to be a problem. And it sort of sparked this question in my mind of, well, why am I not pregnant yet? I'm 37. She got me in touch with her reproductive endocrinologist office, and I scheduled a workup. And sure enough, I was diagnosed with unexplained infertility. My levels were super low, and that's where my journey began. I was 37, went through 7 IUIs, never was successful with that, and then moved on to IVF. I live in Chicago, so I did 2 rounds of IVF here locally in Chicago and had one transfer that the embryo got stuck in the catheter as they were trying to implant it. And that was very much, I guess, in hindsight, I know so much more about how much that could have impacted the quality of the embryo, but they decided to continue and try to implant it. And, certainly it did not take. So after 2 rounds in Chicago, I took a bit of a mental break And then I moved on to a clinic in Colorado. I was scheduled for 3 rounds. We ended up ceasing our treatment after 2 just because my response rates were low. I had 1 frozen embryo from my first round in Colorado. And then when they thawed that, it had trisomy 16, which would indicate that it would never become a viable pregnancy. So that's where my journey ended. And I was offered the opportunity to get an egg donor or to adopt. And after much consideration with my husband, we decided that that was not the path we wanted to pursue. And there I sat with very few resources and a whole lot of grief.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you said that. Yes, a whole shit ton of grief, right? Thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit how you found your way to coaching.
Well, I gained a ton of weight. I know the weight gain is as to be expected with IVF and all the hormones. And I was probably a year and a half out of my treatments and my weight gain was continuing. And I went to Weight Watchers. I did Whole30. I did all the diets you can imagine. I'd lose the weight. And then the minute I stopped whatever protocol it was, I would jump back up to my post IVF weight. And then I found a woman named Corinne Crabtree, who was a weight loss coach. And I heard her talk about how we could actually listen to the thoughts that we're having about ourselves, about our circumstances, what food, the role that food plays in our life. And no one had ever really talked to me about things like that. And so that's through my weight gain actually is how I found coaching. So I then found out she was a life coach. I didn't even know she was a life coach. I just thought she was the magic ticket to me getting to my pre-IVF weight, which she was. I did lose 25 pounds and was back to my comfortable weight. And from there, realized how the thought work in my weight loss journey really impacted the benefit that I had in my beliefs about myself as a woman without children. So that's how I found coaching.
So good. I'm so glad you said that because that's something that I talk about a lot is there are a lot of parallels between the struggle with infertility and the conversation that you have with yourself and the struggle with like maintaining weight or weight loss and those kind of conversations you have with yourself. There are a lot of parallels because a lot of it comes down to your perception of yourself, your perception of your life, your self-worth, a lot of those things. I love that you were able to kind of bridge that gap when you found Corinne. And we do love Corinne here. We talk about Corinne all the time. I would love to have her on to talk about like weight loss and PCOS and stuff like that. How did you decide to kind of marry those two? I know when you were talking about when you sat there after you had finished your IVF cycles and no support, like even when I was going through coach training and I was going through IVF, the supports that kind of exist now on like Instagram, where there's a large community of infertility on Facebook, those didn't really exist or they weren't really that visible. So tell us a little bit about like what happened for you in that transition when you were realizing that we're done with treatments and what that looks like and how you married those two with coaching.
The path to finding some sort of support was totally on my own. I remember going back for acupuncture with the woman that I went through my acupuncture protocol with during my IVF. And she worked at this multi-specialty holistic practice. And I remember like asking her, is there anyone you've heard patients go to that are like me? Like I need someone to talk to. I just have not been referred to anyone. I want someone that understands me. And she told me about a therapist in their practice. But then I sort of felt like I wanted someone that wasn't, and I don't want to say just a therapist, but I wanted somebody who knew my story and knew what it felt like to be me. And there was just nobody there. So I really felt like there was this need for people to be an example. I just wanted to see that there was somebody that was physically breathing in this world that went through what I went through and had these dreams of being a mom and couldn't be a mom and still continued on with a life that was thriving and fulfilling. It was me telling my story for the first time on my podcast that put my story out there and allowed me to start creating this community that I just couldn't find. And like you, I didn't have the Instagram resources. When I finished my treatments, it was in 2018, and there just was very few people out there talking about anything. I just decided I'm going to be the first one. And maybe there are people out there I didn't discover, but I also wasn't somebody that was a support group type person. I was always very high functioning and motivated, goal oriented, successful in my career. So I wasn't someone that was comfortable sitting in, as Corinne calls it, the shitty diaper of life, because my personality was, okay, let's figure out how to move past this, or let's figure out how to take ourselves on this journey that doesn't feel like my life's always going to be at 50%. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that's perfect. And I love that you said like showing yourself as like a living, breathing example of life after treatment fails, because I think that for many of us, when we're kind of in the throes, or when we're even considering like the potentiality of it not working, we kind of can't even imagine what our life would look like. In a lot of our minds, it's almost tantamount to death, like emotional death, physical death. It really does feel that powerful. So I love that embodying, being a living, breathing example of like, you actually don't die. There is life beyond this, and it's possible. And the fact that you were able to like cultivate that, not necessarily by yourself, but as yourself being that first avatar of success and life and love and joy after treatment. I think that's beautiful.
One thing that I realized is I didn't talk about what I was going through because I had a lot of shame, because I associated not being able to get pregnant or going through these treatments and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket and still not achieving my goal. I carried a lot of shame, and I focused that failure, that the treatments didn't work for me, as me failing as a human.
Yes.
And as somebody who was very high functioning in their career and known as someone who was successful and goal oriented, to even fess up to the fact that I had this body that didn't produce a child, it kept me even more introverted. And my first couple rounds, when I was still doing it here in Chicago, I didn't even tell anyone at my job I was going through it, because I associated me not being successful at it as me being unsuccessful as a woman. So it was just this really heavy mind fuck of trying to really see myself as somebody who was a successful woman if I couldn't get pregnant. And then I would notice that I thought of my life as being the worst case scenario, because going through treatments, I was like, oh my gosh, if I ever end up not having a child, and then I end up not having a child, I was basically living this worst case scenario that I had painted throughout my 7 years of treatments.
So good. That is so good. Yes. Everything you said, cosine, cosine, cosine. Because yes, we do consider that to be the worst case scenario, as if like we're forced to build a life after that. Is that probably one of the biggest themes or things that you find with your clients? This idea of like, I'm the worst case scenario. And I know I said that cosine, but on the personal failing, yes, 100%. Even just for many people, and I think I can definitely say this for myself, that idea of personal failing just to get to IVF, like my body couldn't do the one thing it's supposed to do. Just we're supposed to just have sex and it be magically happen. So yes, so those two things, the personal failing and the worst case scenario, would you say that those are probably the two biggest themes that you see for your clients?
They are, but the probably third one, if I were to think of something that's parallel to that, is just envisioning what your future can be like. Because when you basically lose this identity of being a mom, which most of us have carried with us since, let's be honest, we were little girls carrying around our dolls and mothering our dolls and pushing strollers and playing house. We had been socialized to think that we were just always going to be moms. And innately, it was something that we gravitated towards. So to mourn that loss of this identity, I would say, is probably on the same level of that worst case scenario sort of tripod.
That's probably one of the things that when I'm talking to my clients, and maybe we've gone through a couple of rounds that have not been successful, I think for entering the probability or the possibility zone of it not being successful, I think the scary part of that conversation is the unknown. So talk me through when we're talking to a person who maybe hasn't decided just yet that we're finished with
with treatment. But we're getting close. Like we have a sneaking suspicion this is just not going to work for us. And we're getting close. How do you kind of broach that conversation about, it's okay to look to the really scary thing so that we make it less scary? What does that conversation look like?
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I struggled with for a long time was even talking to women that were still actively pursuing treatments, because I felt like I would burst their bubble, or my story would cause them to lose hope in their ability to become a parent or become a mom. So I noticed for a long time, I was very uncomfortable. And obviously this is pre-coaching, but I was very uncomfortable giving the advice of, okay, well, this is the protocol I was on. And, I knew how much I wanted that support from other people that were going through it to just reassure me this is what IVF is like. And this is how I managed working full time and still going through my morning monitoring appointments. And, I had all this knowledge and love I wanted to give to an active patient, but I felt like I would hold them back from dreaming and keeping their self-confidence going and their dreams pursued, because they would be like, oh my gosh, but I'm going to end up like Lana. So it's been so relieving to feel like I can talk to women and separate my story from their story and help them see that they have so much power within them to listen to themselves and really be at peace with where they are on their journey for themselves, and not use me as a roadblock or somebody that they just don't want to associate with because my journey didn't turn out like they hope that theirs will. The best opportunity I have to offer women some sort of hope or some sort of self-knowledge is to understand what it is that you are searching for. Is a child going to be the thing that creates a woman that you are proud of and a life that you find fulfilling? And understand that you already are that within your being right now. And of course, having a child can just multiply that, but understanding that regardless of whether the journey works out for you or whether you're at your wit's end with treatments or financially you just can't afford it anymore, knowing that if you choose to walk away from that or choose to say, I'm done with this chapter, that you still have everything within you and you possess the ability to still have a glorious and fulfilling life.
Two things came to my mind while you were talking. One is that you being this worst case scenario for someone else and that might block them or kind of drain their confidence or hope, is that we do tend to view like a realistic expectation and being hopeful is almost like adversaries, that they can't exist at the same time. I had an open coaching call last week, and that was one of the topics, is this idea of, I want to be realistic, but I also want to be hopeful. And the idea that they can't exist at the same time, that like to be hopeful, you're not going to be being realistic, and to be realistic, you can't possibly be hopeful. I think that's just such a really interesting thing, that we can hold both of those at the same time. It's completely possible. We do it all the time. We're just not conscious that we're holding both of them at the same time. For you to be able to have conversations with women still actively going through treatment, and that being something like, yes, this is a possibility. It's always a possibility for anybody going through treatment or not. My situation is the possibility, but it doesn't mean that we can't continue to move forward with treatment or plan for the potential that treatment not work. Like, it doesn't have to be that you make this decision and you have just filleted yourself over and over and over to get to a point and then seek out coaching to help move past it. You can start that coaching process and develop that connection with yourself before you even make that decision. I love that so much.
I think it's so important that people like you exist, because I wasn't offered coaching when I was going through IVF, and knowing what I know now, having a resource like you and your community would just make the process, in my opinion, feel so much more supported. And the only person I ever felt like I had support from was my IVF nurse. And that was just the only constant voice that I had to follow me through my treatment. So I just have to put a plug in for the need for more women to seek coaching from people like you because it's such a valuable resource.
One of the big things that I find about kind of our community is that we are in such we have such an urgency for the baby, for the protocol, for the process. We really forget that that's 50% of the equation. The other 50% is your body, your mind, your emotional state going through this. And, one of the things that I really focused on, particularly for my last IVF cycle, was the biggest determinant, and I do believe this, the biggest determinant for how I feel after a cycle, regardless of the outcome, is how I treat myself, how well I feel like I've advocated for myself, and just overall loving myself through the process. I think it just makes even disappointment a little less terrible. Like, disappointment hurts. It's going to hurt. There's not really an option for there's not really a path without pain for this. Like walking away from treatment, going through treatment, there's always going to be some sort of pain associated. So loving myself, and then recognizing that I don't have to lose myself through this process or afterwards. And I think when you and I talked the first time, that was a big focus of our conversation, was like, how do I still find the things that I love, not stopping my life just because of treatment or afterwards? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Felt like my life was on hold, and you're supposed to have these air quotes golden years, right? Where you're a newlywed, you have these new memories, new travels, new life that you're starting together. And I felt this stop in my life where I was just in this holding pattern. We didn't know, do we buy the house with 4 bedrooms? Do we stay in a condo? Do we book a cruise with family next year, or are we going to be pregnant? So I felt like there was this vacuum that my life just kept in this compartment because I was so afraid to plan for anything. And we ended up buying the house with the 4 bedrooms and living in this house. And I'd look at these rooms and wonder, which one's going to be, is it going to be a boys' room or a girls' room? Or in my mind, mentally planning for these things that year after year never came to fruition. It was a very confining place to live my life feeling as though I didn't have control over it. And I see now that that doesn't have to be the way that I view it, that of course there's going to be unknowns. And of course I may not know whether I can go on a vacation, but that doesn't have to keep me almost as a prisoner in my infertility. That, worst case scenario, I get the travel insurance and I cancel the trip. But when I kept telling myself I couldn't do all these things because I didn't know, that just compounded the anxiousness and the emotion that I associated with the success of my different IVF rounds or my IUIs, depending on where I was in my journey.
That's so good. Yes, because every one of my clients says they feel like their life is on hold. And one of the things that we talk about is where your locus of control is and where it isn't. And our locus of control is never with the outcome. We never have control over that. But, when people say, well, I can't plan a trip or I can't do this, I offer that I think you can. You're choosing to prioritize the IVF cycle, and there's nothing wrong with that. But reminding yourself, oh, I can plan this. I'm choosing not to, or I'm choosing to defer it. We want to take our power back and empower ourselves at every turn and any possibility where we can do that. And if that is one area where you can remind yourself, this is my choice. It doesn't feel like I have a choice, but it really does. It really is my choice. I think it takes a little bit more of the power IVF has over us and gives it back to ourselves where it belongs. Like, this is all a voluntary process. And I think because we feel so beholden to that dream, to that vision of our family in our heads, it really doesn't feel like it's a choice. And I think that is a huge sticking point for a lot of people. And another one, which you also touched on, is this idea of like, well, when I have the baby or when I get pregnant, then my life will get to start. You're familiar with that one, right?
I am. Because what I experience, and I know a lot of women in my community experience, is the journey ends and you don't know where to start because you don't have the child to then say, okay, I'm ready to start my life now. So you stay in that holding pattern. I know for me, I did that. I did that in my career where I was like, okay, well, I just assumed I was going to have a baby and then I would walk away from my corporate job, maybe work part-time and, keep my hand in corporate America. But I just sat there almost frozen because that next step wasn't written out for me. And it was probably the most overwhelming part of finding out that I couldn't become a mom was what in the hell am I going to do with these next 50 years of my life? I assumed that I'd become a mom and my milestones and my experiences would be part of being a mother and, sending kids to school and then to prom and then to college and then become a grandmother. And when that isn't an opportunity for you, it's very overwhelming. And I found I just sat in this period of being stuck because there was not the silver lining that I expected.
Oh my God, that's so good. Yes. That moment, which is like the scary part that we don't want to say out loud. What the hell am I going to do with the next 50 years? So when you're talking with women and this idea of like confronting the terrifying part, what does that look like? How would you walk your clients through starting to rebuild our life? Like, what does that even look like?
Well, I think the biggest thing is understanding what it is that you desire. So it's called an I desire statement. And prior to doing that, we just brainstorm what is it that we are truly desiring. And a lot of us, it's connection, it's purpose, it's meaning, a legacy, because all those things we associated as motherhood being the only way to achieve those things. So we start out what it is that we're feeling right now, but how we are desiring to feel or what we're desiring to achieve with our futures, which isn't like a one-day process. I'll tell you that because there's a lot to unpack. We go through and we differentiate what it feels like in infertility, like where we're feeling right now with our infertility and where our moments of thriving are and some of the emotions that come up from there. So we start with identifying the disparities between how we've been feeling through infertility, how we want to feel when we're thriving, and then deciding like, what is it that we're truly desiring? And that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be a lifelong statement. I think a lot of us associate a purpose as being one thing that defines us for the trajectory of our future. So understanding that our purpose can change daily, hourly, monthly, and understanding that we serve different purposes in different ways to different people. So my second grade teacher was to her children serve the purpose of motherhood, but for me, she is who taught me arithmetic, so understanding that there isn't one sole purpose and then going through and understanding how to let go of that baggage or that wet towel of motherhood is the only thing that can create your purpose. So we get really clear on what it is we're desiring. And again, it could be in small little chunks of time, could be a lifelong desire. And then understand how are we going to achieve that? Where do we go? What are some ways that we can start to find that, fill that desire or find that desire or achieve that desire? So we start off with an I desire statement.
I love that so much. I love that that you're allowing them the opportunity to kind of, number one, unravel some of those social constructs that we have been imprinted on for millennia, right? That this idea of motherhood is the totality of your experience as a woman, which is never been true, but it's certainly not true by modern standards when we have so much more access to things. But also just kind of the space to permit them to desire whatever the hell it is they want to desire. There's so much sacrifice, personal sacrifice that we go through during treatments. And I think that just like opening the door to like, what is it you want? Do you want to buy a van and be a vagabond and work remotely and just travel the country in your van? Like, what is it you want that there's no limits to? And that it's okay to want whatever you want. Like all of that. I love that so much.
And just even having someone give you the permission to dream about something other than motherhood, because for so long we have waited for this moment to become a mom. We've married the person that we married or partnered with the person we've partnered with because our end goal was to create a human together. And when we realize and have the permission to say that doesn't have to be the story for everyone, there's almost like, for me, I just felt like there was a sense of relief, like, oh my gosh, like, really? I could actually enjoy my own company or enjoy company with my husband or friends or travel in this carefree lifestyle that we somehow don't feel we're worthy of having because it doesn't include a child.
That was what I was trying to say, and you articulated it so beautifully. 100%. Thank you for taking whatever I was trying to say, and that was a beautiful point. Yes.
I'm with you, girl.
If you could impart like one piece of wisdom, one piece of advice, something like that to the listeners who maybe they're in the throes of treatment, they're not even considering a life after treatment, or maybe we're tiptoeing the line and we might have to make that decision, or we're considering that decision. What would you offer that person listening?
Well, I think it's very important to know that whether you have a child or not, this is not a waste. And I believe that regardless of whether I had a child or not, I would still go through every heartbreak, every canceled cycle, everything. I would still do it again because that experience is what formed who I am today. And maybe it didn't turn out like I thought it would, but I would still have repeated every single step that I took and have no regrets. Because whether you become a mother or not, there is so much opportunity for you to create a life that feels amazing, and believing that you have every perfect gift within you to create a life, whether it's with a child or not, is probably the biggest advice I can get, is just to not look at yourself and look at your journey and the money that you've spent as a waste, because it's not a waste. It's just a means to the next chapter in your life.
So good. That I just felt the presence of my mother, who has always said education comes in many forms and education is never a waste. That just spoke to me so much. Thank you for being here. Now, I know you mentioned you have a podcast, so how can everybody find you?
I do have a podcast. It comes out every Tuesday. It's called the So Now What podcast. You have to search all 5 words. It talks about, so now what? You're done with your treatments. You don't have a child. What are you going to do? And then also on social media, my Instagram handle is at Lana, Lana Manikowski, Manikowski. And I have a website. It's right now Stitch Coaching, STITCH Coaching. I just love the opportunity to talk to you and talk to your beautiful listeners who are so brave, and just proud of you, regardless of whether you become a mom or not. Know that you're loved and you're supported by Emily and me and all the other thousands of women out there who've been in your shoes.
Oh, everyone, go listen to Lana. We all need more Lana in our life. That's the end result of this. We need more Lana in our life. Thank you so much for being here, Lana. This was such I know our listeners, whether they're facing end of treatments or not, they're going to benefit from this episode. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard and want to learn more, head over to ivfthiscoaching.com. That's www.ivfthiscoaching.com.